Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel. I am your host, Ari Stamatakos, and today we're here with a roundtable discussion preview of the A-League Men's Final Series that kicks off on Friday. I'm joined by two beautiful people from the Inner Sanctum, Antonis and Lachlan. So, Lachlan, I'll start with you. How are you feeling? We're joined by two Adelaide supporters as well. As a victory supporter, I have no horse in the race. But Lachlan, we'll start with you. How are you feeling heading into the
Yeah,
series?
I'm very excited. I feel like we're better placed than we were last season. So I did get a memory just yesterday of when we won the premiership in 2016. So hopefully we can replicate that. But yeah, there's a few hurdles we'll have to get through first.
Yeah, it's a good omen. It's a good omen, mate. Antonis, what about you? Are you optimism or pessimism for your boys? And generally, what are your thoughts on the finals, on the upcoming final series?
Yeah, with the World Cup in the middle of this season, it's kind of felt like it's dragged on
Yeah,
forever. So
yeah,
it's good to finally be here. Agree with Lockie that United is better placed than previous seasons, but it kind of feels like they've kind of hit a flat spot just before entering finals and I guess conceding 4 goals at home the week before the final starts. Not the ideal preparation, but we'll see how it plays out.
yeah. It's definitely going to be an interesting first week. Obviously, heading into the first week, City and Melbourne City and Central Coast do get that week off. Adelaide will be versing Wellington at home or at Coopers, and of course, it is the big Sydney derby in the other elimination final. Now, before we start going through the first week of finals, what are your thoughts? What are you guys' thoughts on the overall top six? Because there were a few, maybe pre-season. I don't think this would be the top six that a lot of people would have. Was anyone stiff to miss or any shocks that you thought came from this top six? Antonis, we'll start with you because obviously no Melbourne victory there is a big shock, but as the season played out, it's not that surprising. But yeah, what are your
Yeah.
overall thoughts on the top
Well,
six?
that's the thing. When you look at last year's semi-final, it's Melbourne victory, Western United
Yeah,
miss out on the six, especially with Western United being the champions. And as you mentioned, as it plays out, it's not really a shock. I can't say that anyone outside the top six can have any complaints about missing out on it, because at times it kind of felt like everyone was trying to avoid the top six and to make it from those sides. So I think it's a fair enough top six. Wellington on the fringes there, they had a strong season. I kind of fell apart towards the end. Sydney was so and so until they found form in the last month. And I feel from Wanderers to Melbourne City and everything in between, it's kind of been a solid season for everyone involved. I do think, though, Central Coast has wildly outperformed everyone's expectations. And it's great to see because they go about it very differently to the majority of the clubs. And it's really working out for them. So it's great to see them finish second and have a chance at a grand final and Asian football next year.
yeah. One of the stories of the season. Dan, what are your thoughts on the top six overall?
Yeah, well, like Antonis said, and like you said, I was extremely surprised with the way, if I looked at the table now and you told me that Melbourne Victory were going to finish second last at the start of the season, I would not have believed you by any stretch of the imagination. Um, yeah, and I also thought the team that won the grand final, as you said, Western United, I thought they'd be a lock for the finals as well. I think the top four are a fair way ahead of the fifth and sixth. I sort of think Sydney have manufactured a bit of a run late, but they were quite poor towards the start of the season. Um, Wellington are a bit the same. So I think the top four are a fair way ahead, and the last two spots really could have gone to anyone. But yeah, it was just Sydney and Wellington, I guess, found form at the right time.
Yeah, there was that. Well, it's like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Even
Yeah,
Victory could have made it. McCarthy could
yeah,
have made it, right? So it
hmm
was a really competitive back end of the season, especially for that, for those final two spots. I do agree. I do think the top four, especially in my opinion, the top three. I think the top three are there's a clear divide. Western Sydney as well are quite good, but I think the fifth and sixth was very competitive throughout the year. So if we're going to move on to week one, obviously the week one of the finals, it does kick off on Friday with Adelaide, and I think it's only right that I let you guys take the floor here. Adelaide versus Wellington, Friday the 5th of May, 7:45. Dan, we'll start with you. What are your any nerves, thoughts, expectations on that game?
First of all, it's 7:15
Oh yes,
for
right.
real people time.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Well, technically it is 7:45 Victorian time. Yes, yes, that is right. But there you go, there you go. What are your and Dan, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts? There you go.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was
pretty well all in on, yep, we're winning the grand final. Yeah, it's all smooth sailing. And then after the draw with Sydney FC, where they played well in the first half, and then the rain came in that second half, and it all fell apart. And then the 4-1 loss on Friday night on the eve of finals is quite. It can be demoralising for the team. So a couple of weeks ago, I was very excited for the finals, and I thought we'll go deep. But Wellington, they do scare me a little bit, but I think we've got enough. We've got enough to beat them. I think we're a better side, especially at home. It helps too.
Yeah, Antonis, do you echo the thoughts?
Yeah, and just a thought with the Wellington supporters who'll see their team kick off at 9:45. So
There you
when
go.
you talk about times,
There
but
you go.
as Lockie said, Adelaide is where it is for a reason. Coming in, obviously the last few games have hit a bit of a flat patch, but when you look at 13 games unbeaten, one short of the club record, it happens for a reason. Adelaide's a strong team, and it only a few weeks ago beat Wellington 4-0 at home. So that's a recent game to look at. I do believe, though, Wellington are a dangerous team, especially the way Adelaide is conceding goals. And when you have Oscar Zavada up front for Wellington, you can never count them out. And I do feel Wellington is at its best when it is backs against the wall. No one rates us. We're going to go and give it our best shot. So Adelaide had the top 2 spot going into this game against the Mariners, and they surrendered it. So now it's got a very awkward game. I'm not going to go, it is a tough game, but it's more of an awkward game. That it's one where all the pressure is on you. You go from having a week off to having all the pressure. And if they're not careful, it can turn sour pretty quickly.
Yeah, you do raise a good point. How like in a matter of a week, it can go from we're going to cruise into a top 2 week off to all of a sudden we should beat Wellington. We're better than them. It's at home, but it's like there's a lot to go wrong, especially with the threat that Wellington have up front.
And a point about that, because right when the referee was blowing full time on Friday night for United's game, Marco Tilio scored the winner at the Melbourne City game. So all the United supporters were actually cheering at full time because that goal meant that United went from facing the Wanderers, I think would have been, facing Sydney FC, to facing Wellington, which is obviously a far more likely matchup. But I'm sure we'll talk about it in a moment. The issue with that, though, is if United does advance, it's suddenly on the Central Coast side of the bracket, and Central Coast has been United 4-0 and 4-1 this season. So there's no easy way to get to a grand final.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on the permutations of week 2 and of course the other week as well. Quick prediction for as we move on to the Sydney Derby after this. Quick prediction. I know you guys probably don't want to jinx anything, but Dan, we'll start with you. Any thoughts? Maybe a scoreline.
I'll go Adelaide 2-0. Not a very sort of somewhat of a convincing 2-0. They'll struggle. I think we'll get one early, but then the second one will come quite late. Might be a bit of a Irukunda special towards the end, where I think he finds himself on the score sheet this week.
Yeah, Antonis?
I reckon it's going to be 3-1 Adelaide's way, but it's not going to be as comfortable as that scoreline suggests. I reckon it's going to be a bit of a scrap for the majority of it, but I do think Adelaide has enough quality and being at home to find itself going over the top. But yeah, it's not going to be comfortable.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's going to be a tight game. I think Wellington, obviously, the pressure is on Adelaide. Wellington coming, obviously traveling a fair distance in a position where they probably didn't think they would be, because they obviously fell off towards the back end of the season. They had a pretty poor run of form towards the back end of the season. So I think Wellington will definitely be out for the fight. The threat that they've got up front as well can't be understated. But I think Adelaide should be able to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
But it will be tight. I'll go 2-0. I reckon they'll score quite early and then hit them on the counter. I agree with Dan and Irukunda special potentially.
And it's easy to forget that last season they also snuck into finals last season. And if it wasn't for a superb Jamie Young save, Western United probably doesn't win that grand final. So they are one of those awkward sides that you can't just dismiss.
Yeah, they definitely pose a threat and can't underestimate him in the slightest. So that's that game. We'll move on to the game on Saturday, and this one is at 7:45 time. It's not at 7:15, so there you go. Western Sydney versus Sydney FC, the first ever Sydney derby, I'm pretty sure, as a final. This has the makings. Of course, there's been some controversy or some kind of attention given to what's happening off field, which we could be here for 3 hours if we want to discuss that. So we'll keep that to on pitch kind of happenings. But this has the makings of a really, really interesting game. Of course, there's been a couple of interesting derbies already this season between both of those sides. Western Sydney, probably the more informed team, even though Sydney have won 3 on the bounce heading into finals. Obviously, Joe Lolly has a massive injury question over him, going off that hamstring injury. Antonis, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts for this one? Because this has game of the year potential written all over it, I reckon.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I just feel it's a bit of a shame that this is a season where this gets served up. And again, it's Western Sydney. After United drops points, it's on their plate to earn second position. They go from having a potential week off to having the most awkward of awkward matchups. Because I don't care what Marco Rudan might say that, oh, yeah, we've got their number or we are comfortable with this match. You do not want this match in the first week of finals. It's such an emotional matchup. And, Sydney has lost. It lost its first derby at the new stadium. It got demolished in the last derby. But Sydney actually won a derby in between there. So at Parramatta, so they've got that belief that they can do it. And after the bang average gate, I think they've got a massive chip on their shoulder. So it's definitely going to be a match to watch. I cannot wait for that.
Yeah, 100%. It has the makings of a really, really good game. Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I agree. It could absolutely be one of the games of the season. The build up to this game all off season into that first derby it's like nothing I've ever seen in the A-League before, to be honest with you. And the build up pre-game on the day as well. Antonis, I think you flew over for that game. And then that second one with Max Burgess scoring the winner in front of the away end, and then Western Sydney had their way in the most recent game, but you couldn't ask for a bigger finals game. I know it doesn't necessarily kick off the final series because of Adelaide's game on the Friday, but this is you couldn't want much more as a neutral, I don't think.
It's got like, when you look towards the season, you look at obviously the derbies like from every team, right? Look at where the Melbourne derby is, the Sydney derby, etc. But considering where both sides were, like maybe even last year, and I don't think many people would have thought both teams would be in this position, especially maybe even a month, 2 months ago, because a lot has changed since. Western Sydney probably go into this game with a little bit more confidence, I'd say, just because of their performances throughout the season. They've kind of been consistent throughout the year, whereas Sydney have hit this, like, they've won their last 3 games to get into finals. They've lost 2 of the derbies and won 1 of them. So it will be interesting. If I was to give a prediction for it, I feel like something is going to happen. Like, this has the makings for a moment that will be replayed for a long, long time. I reckon it may involve. I'm assuming there's no injury cloud over him or any suspension over him, but I'm assuming there's something to do with Milos Nikovic. It has to be, right? There has to be, right? It's built up for it. Whether it's a goal or whether he has a Beckham moment and gets sent off or whatever, there's something's happening with Nikovic, and for the sake of drama, I'll go with a 1-0 Western Sydney Nikovic goal to send them through.
It's a move that has arguably already paid off. But if you have a highlight of him knocking Sydney out of a final, like, what else can you ask for? I think our grandkids will be watching that video if that happens. I do think, though, I don't know, it feels like the way this has fallen, it's the way that we got this at the last minute. I feel like, again, Western Sydney are not going, them or their fans will not say, oh, we don't want this. But I reckon Sydney FC would want every single bit of this. And again, they don't go in as the favourites. And I disagree with that point about being the game of the season, because the game I went to and the other games up until the 4-0 were bang average games. But what made those games the games of the world was the atmosphere. And every little moment, you're like, oh, what's going to happen? Is someone going to snap someone? Is something going to happen? And it made that one moment that came in each one of these games just special. So I'm going to go for another 1-0. But again, I'd like the drama and I like the storyline. And I feel like Western Sydney has had the season. They've had the win at Allianz. I'm going to go for Sydney FC to win 1-0 at Parramatta to knock off the Wanderers after their best season in half a decade.
Yeah.
What a story.
That's a story in itself, considering as well they haven't been in the finals for a long, long time. To be knocked out at home to your arch rivals, that would be something. Dan, can you somehow top this in terms of drama?
I don't think I could top those two, but I do think it will be in stoppage time winner for Western Sydney. I don't think it'll be an inconvenient, but I just think it'll be a cagey type of game. And just end-to-end stuff, really. And I just think there's just something about Western Sydney this season. They've just got too much attacking threat for Sydney FC. I was actually there to watch Sydney FC play Adelaide a few weeks ago. And I thought Adelaide could have won by a lot more. So I'd still have a lot of question marks over that Sydney defence. And with it being at home, I just think Western Sydney will just have that little bit more. And I think they've got a little bit more in their squad to win. But yeah, I'm going with a 90-something minute winner. Yeah, 1-0 Western Sydney.
Yeah, we've all gone very tight, very, very no smashings, no 4-0s are happening, which I think a lot of people would agree with. But yeah, they're obviously the two finals that will be happening over this weekend. This, of course, means, I mean, if we look at week 2 and we look at what could happen in heading into week 2, Melbourne City obviously finishing first, versus the lowest ranked winner of the first two finals. So that's either Western Sydney, Sydney, or Wellington, and then Adelaide, and then Central Coast will verse Adelaide, or the highest ranked winner. So either Adelaide, Western Sydney, or Sydney FC. If you were in the shoes of Melbourne City, we'll start with Melbourne City. Who is the team that you wouldn't want to verse in the next round? Because although obviously rankings and obviously Western Sydney are the highest team, I feel like Melbourne City wouldn't want to verse Sydney. I feel like Sydney have something in them where, especially if they get to the second week, they're going to be eyeing off a grand final. Obviously, they've obviously got the grand final at home no matter what. So I feel like either one of the Sydney teams, but probably more so Sydney FC, Melbourne City wouldn't want to be versing. But Antonis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do believe that Sydney is a flawed team, and I think a team of the quality of Melbourne City can pick up those flaws over 2 legs. If it was in one match, I probably tend to agree, but I reckon it's the Wanderers that would want to see, which I do feel like Melbourne City does have the Wanderers numbers. The Wanderers number, sorry. It's the one side I feel like City does not want to see in the finals is Adelaide United, because they have had problems. They have not beaten the Reds in normal time the last 2 seasons. Just once in extra time last year. It's obviously not possible to happen in the semi-final. But yeah, I do believe that Melbourne City would be happy with its week off and will be happy to accept whichever challenger comes. But I do believe that if there was one that they probably wouldn't want to, they would have a bit more of a challenge with, it would be the Wanderers, who did give them a game last week. But again, over 2 legs, I'd probably be backing Melbourne City, who's made all these grand finals for a reason recently.
Yeah, they are exceptional. Dan, what do you agree?
Yeah, well, I think Melbourne City are going to be too strong regardless. But I agree with you, Ari. I think they'd rather play Western Sydney than they would Sydney. There's just something weird about Sydney FC. Especially if they win against Western Sydney, they'll get a little bit of a roll on, I reckon, and they'll take a lot of momentum and a lot of confidence out of that first game, and I think they could annoy Melbourne City a lot. And yeah, I think they'll be good enough over 2 legs, as Antonis said. But yeah, I think they'd rather see a Western Sydney win than they would a Sydney FC win.
Yeah, obviously that would mean Sydney would have won 4 on the bounce. Obviously heading into the finals, and then that big win over Western Sydney should have fallen that way. So yeah, I think either way, I think I do agree. I think City will be too strong regardless, but I think either one of the Sydney teams will give them a game. I don't see Wellington. I don't see Wellington having the quality if they were to get there to really put up a fight against City. I just think they're way too strong, especially in terms of Wellington's kind of midfield and defensive third in comparison to City's kind of ability to dominate the ball and ability to score relatively easily. I think that will be too much for Wellington. Looking at it from a Central Coast perspective, obviously they can verse Adelaide, and we've seen what they did to them last week. But I don't think Central Coast would, well, like obviously they wouldn't want to come up against Adelaide the most. So I think Adelaide would want to come up against Central Coast, to be honest. I think they're happy in a sense that it's kind of fallen this way because it's a little bit of a mental thing or a superstition type thing, but I can't see a way in which Adelaide don't respond if they end up versing Central Coast. Even though Central Coast won 4-1 and it was the scoreline would suggest it was a relatively easy game. I think the chip on Adelaide's shoulder will be pretty big across two legs, being able to play at home as well, wanting that revenge. I think Central Coast would want to be as far away from Adelaide as possible. And I think Western Sydney's ability to be very defensively solid could hinder Central Coast as well. And Sydney probably is the team that they would want to verse the most. But Dan, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts? Or if you were Central Coast, who would you not want to verse the most in the second week of finals?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they'd want to play Adelaide, and I'm not just saying that because I do barrack for Adelaide, but they just Adelaide have the most quality in their squad out of the rest of those teams. And as you said, at home, they would be absolutely filthy with the result that they had last Friday, being at home last Friday too. And I think they will come out with a lot of fire in the belly following that if they do progress to that second round to play Central Coast. And yeah, I'd say they would not like to see Adelaide win this Friday night. They'll be riding Wellington home the whole way.
Yeah, for sure, Antonis.
I do feel that Central Coast is probably comfortable to play whoever they come up against because I think they've shown that they are a team in form. And especially against Adelaide, who not only have they beaten Adelaide, but they've stopped Adelaide from scoring. And Central Coast plays very similar to Adelaide, the high press, that pressing into mistakes, high scoring in transition. And I feel like they're comfortable fighting fire with fire and winning. I think it goes on Adelaide's side that when going to the pre-game presser before the Mariners game, I asked Carl Viet about do you review that last game back in whenever it was, January, February, when you went up to Central Coast and lost 4-0? And he said, oh, it's not really something we look at. And then you have the game kind of replicate itself. If you make that semi-final and play the Central Coast, something I really like about this new format is it's not a couple of games months apart from each other. It's 1 week and another week. You see what happens, you have to adjust to it. And it's going to be very interesting to see how these two coaches who have a very similar philosophy in the way they play, the way their squad profiles are made up of younger players, how they adjust against each other. And I do feel like, yeah, the Mariners may back themselves, but it might even cancel itself out once you play each other in such a short space, especially with Adelaide having the chip on their shoulders, like you said.
Yeah, obviously the two-legged games, Adelaide, Melbourne City and Central Coast will be the away leg, well, the away team first, and then return home, which in theory gives an advantage. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But I think let's move on and let's finish things up in a sense by looking at the grand final. Now we'll obviously get the grand final prediction, who will be playing, and of course the winners. I can't see a world in which Melbourne City don't make it. I think they're by far the best team, and I think they will be deserved participants of the grand final. Now, I think it will be a Central Coast Adelaide semi, and I I just think Adelaide will not want to have that happen again, or what happened in the most recent game. I think over the two legs, I think it favors Adelaide a little bit more. I think they've got I think they play to the occasion a little bit better than maybe what Central Coast do. I think they have a little bit more of an advantage playing in high. Obviously, Cooper Stadium has been one of the better attended grounds so far this season, so they have that familiarity with playing in high tempo or high pressure games with a lot of stakes or with a big crowd, big atmosphere. So over the two legs, I think Adelaide will be able to get it done. So I've got a City versus Adelaide final, and I don't want to upset either of you two, but I think that Melbourne City just have far too much quality. I think it'll be tight. I think Adelaide will definitely make a game of it for sure, but I can only see Melbourne City running away with it, and unless unless there's a little bit of an overthinking happening from Melbourne City, they try to be a little bit too cute with the way they approach the game, and Adelaide are able to kind of counteract that with just effective direct football. I would go Melbourne City beat Adelaide 2-0 in the final, in the grand final. And yeah, I don't want to upset either of you two, but they're the honest thoughts.
Yeah, I do have Melbourne City also making the grand final. I think we'll all agree there. Until Adelaide shows me though that it can match up against Central Coast, which will be the matchup, I am going to back Central Coast going into this. I do think Adelaide makes a game of it, but I haven't seen anything in a single minute of the two clashes against Central Coast from the 180 that I'm like, you know what? Adelaide should comfortably do this. It's going to be a fight, and it's a fight that Central Coast has a lot of confidence in. So it's going to take a job. I do think currently, if you ask me today, if finals start today, I do think it's going to be Melbourne City, Central Coast. I would love to see Adelaide make it, obviously. I am backing Melbourne City to win the grand final, but if Adelaide makes it, that's a different case because I do think that Adelaide has that mental advantage over Melbourne City because it just always seems that Adelaide gives them a tougher game than the two lists justify it to be, and often come away with a win or just frustrating with a point. And especially it being on the neutral ground that is Combank Stadium we found today, that plays into Adelaide's hands, who are I guess, not the superior team that would have hosting rights in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, Central Coast for now. But if Adelaide makes it, ask me again.
We'll come back and do this maybe for grand final preview. But Dan, what do you? I'm assuming you definitely agree with one of us. I'm almost certain.
Yeah, well, I think Melbourne City will make it. Yeah, they're just too good, I think. For whoever they play. I just think that home game that Adelaide have, I'm assuming they win on Friday and will go through to face the Mariners. That home leg that they have in that clash is going to be so crucial because I think Central Coast will beat them in Central Coast, but I think Adelaide can beat them in Adelaide. So, however much that scoreline is, I think is just beyond crucial for Adelaide. I'm gonna say Adelaide make it, but I'm gonna say Melbourne City win it 2-1, the grand final up in Sydney. Yeah, I just think their squad is just too good. They've shown that over the last 3 years. They didn't win the grand final last year. We know that, but yeah, they're on a bit of a revenge tour this year, I think, and I just think they'll just be too good.
Yeah, they've been exceptional, and we didn't get a scoreline, Antonis. So if you could quickly.
Again, if it's Central Coast against the Mariners, I'm going. Sorry, Melbourne City against the Mariners. I'm going 3-1 Melbourne City. If Adelaide makes it, I am backing Adelaide in a high-scoring one-goal win.
There
But
you go.
again, once we make it there, I'll give you my prediction there. But right, currently, I've got Melbourne City winning it.
There you go. So, obviously, with the grand final days and finals, we'll be looking at the player of the finals here as a player that will make the name to finish things up and to wrap things up. But I think he scored 2 goals in his most recent game, scored the winner against Western Sydney. I think it's Marco Tilio's time to shine and announce himself properly on the Australian football landscape. I think he's a player that, despite having a lot of kind of publicity around him, still is a little bit underrated in my books. I think he's an exceptional talent, and expect over the 2 games that City will play, expect at least 3 goal contributions in those 2 games, maybe even 4 to make him my finals MVP in a sense. But Antonis, who have you got?
Yeah, I was actually also thinking Marco Tilly is definitely a shot. But after his recent form from the Mariners, Marco Tullio is actually a shout as well because you don't often see players come to Hindmarsh Stadium and just absolutely dominate for the away side like he did on Friday night. So he really caught my eye. And from an Adelaide standpoint, I feel like Craig Goodwin is always out to prove a point.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't shock me if he just rallies United home come Friday night. And then home and away against the Mariners, he's had a couple of quiet games against them this season. And I feel like that's going to be a chip on his own shoulder, especially being the captain, to, I guess, will his side home like he so often does.
For sure. Dan?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. If it's Melbourne City, I think it is Marco Tillier. He's just an unbelievable talent, I reckon. Yeah, the pace that he offers them, he gets on the score sheet more than enough. Yeah, he's a great player. If it's Adelaide, I do agree with Antonis. I've said for a long time now and I think it's almost a league wide view now that Craig Goodwin is one of, if not the best player in the league. And we saw that as well when he played for the Socceroos at the World Cup, how good he was as well. If Adelaide are to go far and Adelaide are to make the grand final, like I said they will, it's going to be Craig Goodwin, I think, because without Craig Goodwin, I don't think Adelaide would even make the finals. But with Craig Goodwin in their side, he offers them something so dynamic. I don't think defenses know how to handle him yet, so I'll go with him if Adelaide make it.
There you go. I think he's a good choice. I think a lot of people would choose him regardless of how far they get. He's just that good a player. But that wraps it up. Thank you you two for joining me. It's been a fantastic chat. Can't wait to see what this final series has in store for us, and hopefully Adelaide can go quite far and potentially get the job done. It's been a while. It's been long overdue. So hopefully for your sakes, they can get it done. But yes, thank you all very much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the Inner Sanctum YouTube channel, like the video. See you guys next time, and goodbye.